Today, we're covering a killer who has seemingly been relegated to the back of the community's mind. A killer who, on release, brought terror back to Dead by Daylight, as well as perhaps the most overpowered killer perk to ever have existed. I know her as Lisa Sherwood, a village girl turned revenge-driven cannibal. But you may know her as the Hag.
A new terror stalks the darkness. Her appearance strikes me as more intense than the others after but a glimpse of her haggard form. Twisted and torn in unspeakable ways, with grayish dead skin stretched over her emaciated body. Her arm is a horrid, overgrown deformity, capable of slashing through both flesh and bone alike. Her very presence speaks of endless torture similar to mine. I wonder, though, did she refuse the Auntie's calling until broken? Or did she wish for this?
The Hag is our third killer in this series, releasing with the Of Flesh and Mud chapter on the 8th of December 2016, bringing a curse upon Dead by Daylight with the Hag herself, the lucky gambler Ace Visconti, and the Backwater Swamp. The trailer was released on the 6th, as you're seeing in the background, and whilst it wasn't a massive spectacle like Myers' trailer, it still garnered a lot of excitement. People would have to wait 2 more days before she finally shambled in, and let me be clear, this design rocks. Swamp monsters in horror media have always been a mixed bag, but the Hag hits a nice balance between the creature of the Black Lagoon and Solomon Grundy. The cannibalistic nature of her character reminded me a lot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Her descriptors of being haggard and emaciated really work wonders in cementing the Hag as this earthly and withered corpse, seemingly hanging on to the life by the reeds and vines of the swamp she lives in. As I said, the 8th came around and she burst from the ground and into the entity's realm, but what was she all about? The Hag would be our second trap-based killer with her power, the Blackened Catalyst. This allowed her to channel her ritualistic magic into the ground to bend the mud to her will. By using her power, she would draw her favourite shape into the ground and set a trap for survivors to spring. Activated traps would generate mud phantasms that spring out of the ground and emit their own terror radius and red stain. They also drag the survivor's camera to face towards the phantasm, disorientating them, which was a unique feature to the Hag. The Hag can also choose to teleport to any activated trap within 40 meters to replace the phantasm to chase or hit the survivor who sprung it. Upon release, the Hag could place a maximum of 10 traps at any given time, and it was painfully slow to do and maintain. Today, thanks to patches and the much valued placement speed add-ons, you can easily lay out a web of traps within the first minutes of a trial. We have a great base for a power, but it would be the add-ons for the Catalyst that took Hag to new heights. We have our usual attire of number tweaks, changing the range of the trap trigger, how fast the Hag could put them down, and how far away the Hag could teleport to them. But it's when we get to our very rare and ultra rare add-ons where we start to see behavior get really creative. All of her very rare add-ons change traps to each do something unique. The most used of these would be the Rusty Shackles, which prevent the mud phantasms from spawning, but would still allow the Hag to teleport, which made the Hag able to appear out of nowhere for grab attempts or just general surprise factor. Others, being the Scarred Hand and Waterlogged Shoe, would disable the Hag's ability to teleport, but in return would grant the traps unique effects. The Scarred Hand would give phantasms collision, allowing them to block doorways, pallets, and windows if placed properly, whereas the Waterlogged Shoe would hinder the survivor's movement speed by 9%, as well as buff the Hag's own movement speed by 4.5%. Unique as these two add-ons are, they're gimmicks and are often not worth replacing the ability to teleport. I want to cover the Disfigured Ear add-on because it's one of a kind. This grants your traps the ability to deafen survivors, a completely unique status effect that isn't even shown on the HUD as a debuff, and partially removes the survivor's ability to hear for 6 seconds. Originally, it used to be this obnoxious, high-pitched whistling sound, and it even had a negative of decreasing how long the phantasms would appear for. Today, it's an inconvenience that muffles the sound of the survivor and is nothing but wasted potential. Now, what we've all been waiting for, the perks. Hag introduced the most impactful mechanic that Dead by Daylight has seen with the introduction of totems and hexes. Let me explain totems and hexes. Hexes are powerful perks that are tied to one of 5 totems spread across the map. As long as these totems are lit, the perk's effects are applied to every survivor in the trial. Survivors are able to locate and destroy these totems to remove their effect permanently. So let's go over what the Hag brought to this. Hex, the third seal, is the weakest of the 3, and is mostly a very situational perk. Its effect is applied through basic attacks, though later in 5.3 it was changed to allow any form of attack to apply, and through it you inflicted the blindness status effect. Yep, just blindness. Back then, blindness was rare to come across and could certainly mess with survivors running aura reading perks such as Bond or Empathy, but as the years have come and gone and how common blindness has become as a status effect, it's certainly lost its uniqueness. Next is Devour Soap. I mean Devour Nope. I mean Devour Hope. It is arguably the strongest perk the Hag has. Devour Hope works on a token-based system, with tokens being earned after letting survivors unhook their allies whilst remaining 24 meters away from the hook. After gaining 2 tokens, you'll be awarded a 5% haste bonus for 10 seconds after another 10 seconds has passed. The third token grants the exposed status effect, allowing you to instantly down survivors, allowing for killers to have more animosity in their hunts. But that 5th token? Ooh, once you get it, all hell breaks loose. When Devour Hope reaches full power, you're allowed to outright mori survivors you knock down. There's no better rush in DBD than getting that token and going on a rampage, killing 2 or 3 survivors and outright removing them from the match. However, Devour Hope being a hex is its power limiter. As useful as exposed and mori and survivors can be, it can be removed very early into the game before you even acquire a token. It is a gamble bringing Devour Hope in solo. As years passed and other perks came into the meta, it became easier to defend Devour Hope till at least 3 tokens. Similar to Third Seal, this didn't change much. It was more so the totem system itself that changed around it. Alright, I'll stop prancing around the hot topic. Hex Ruin. The most powerful perk to have been released to killers and single-handedly defined the meta for several years. And, still to this day, it is considered a decent method of regression. How did Behavior manage to accomplish this and then never do it again? Upon release, Ruin's effect would curse all generators and force survivors to get really good at hitting great skill checks. You would know Ruin would be in effect due to the distinct red coloring of your skill checks, and the generator progress regressing by 5% whenever you hit a good skill check. Great skill checks would simply prevent the regression from taking place, but would not reward the 2% bonus. 5% doesn't seem like a lot, but you have to consider that whenever it happened, the generator would be unable to be repaired for around a second or 2, regardless of how many survivors were working on it, meaning it became more of a detriment to group up on generators back when Leader was the gen rushing perk of choice. Survivors eventually realized that due to how skill checks functioned, having an 8% chance of triggering every second, that if you simply tapped the generator, you could theoretically complete it without having to deal with Ruin. This was laborious and slow to commit to, with most simply choosing to get good at landing the great skill checks. I admit that most of my ability to land great skill checks consistently now came from having to put up with Ruin for a few years. Ruin received its first rework back in 3.5 when Doctor got his rework. Shh, spoilers. It now regressed any generator that wasn't being worked on by double the usual regression. Okay, let me explain. Killers kicking a generator regress generators by 0.5 charges per second, whilst survivors repair at 1 charge per second. So with Ruin in effect, gens regress as fast as survivors can repair them. This led to a controversial debate whether or not Ruin was actually nerfed or buffed with this rework, with both sides making a point that the passive regression benefited some killers over others. Hey, you, get back to your video! Killers who had the ability to continuously knock survivors off of generators benefited a lot more than those who simply walked from place to place. But that didn't stop every single killer from running this perk within their build. It was just that good. Behavior realized their mistake and eventually brought Ruin in line during 6.1 and the Meta Shake-Up, which ruined Ruin. It now regresses at the default rate that killers can regress generators by being that 0.5 charges per second I mentioned earlier. Another downside is if a survivor dies or is sacrificed, then Ruin will snuff itself out and be disabled for the rest of the trial. This leads to an interesting dynamic where you perhaps don't want to tunnel a survivor out of the game as quickly as possible in order to allow Ruin to passively slow the game down more. It's a lot to take in. The Hag brought a lot with her into the realms, but how did the community see her? As with many killers, you'll notice how popularity tends to decrease as months go on, with Hag being fairly common upon release, but over the years, she has slowly been relegated to the backlines. Unless you're one of the few Hag mains that have taken the time to work out where to place traps and how to influence survivors into running into their web of phantasms. I can't really talk about Hag without mentioning the greatest and most dedicated Hag main out there, Michi. Michi is a Hag main from Germany who is out of this world when it comes to knowledge about our Muddy Witch, going as far as to create a nearly 40-minute guide on every single possible use for Hag's traps and strategies for integrating traps before, during, and after chase. Aside from Michi, the Hag tends to be one of the rarer killers you'll see day to day, with skill levels varying from Frosty Eyes simply trying to get a daily ritual done, to a day one Hag main practicing for some competitive scrim match. Speaking of the competitive side of DBD, the Hag would be one of the few killers out there capable of standing toe-to-toe with top-level teams. The rules of that environment allows the Hag to get away with camping a survivor on hook and having a web of traps to contest the map. Only real issue is competitive teams knowing that it only takes one of them to harass the Hag's traps whenever she is preoccupied. A network of traps means nothing if you're too busy being unable to teleport to them. Tier list wise, I'm going to throw Otz's list at you. Yes, call it a cop-out, but it's a list most people agree with. The Hag has dipped in power with the release of newer killers, but hangs around B to B+ with the capability to ascend to A with the right add-ons, map offerings, perks, etc. Balance-wise, the Hag has been through quite a lot during her time in service to the entity. She was powerful upon release, but through the years she's been mostly buffed to stay in peak fitness, which is more than I can say for another trap-based killer. Patch 1.5 is where the Hag received her first notable change in her trap setting speed being quickened in phases 1 and 3. Phase 1 and 3 simply refer to the Hag kneeling down and standing back up when she's placing her traps. She also gained some counterplay in survivors being able to crouch around inside of a trap's radius in order to avoid setting it off. The Hag would then go on to be adjusted in 1.9.3 with her terror radius being bumped down from 28 meters to 24 meters, making her quite hard to detect considering her small stature and color palette blending in with the greys, greens, and browns of the realms. 2.0 brought along a bug fix that fixed the Hag vaulting unintentionally slower than every other killer in the game, and whilst vaulting isn't a major strategy for the Hag, it is sometimes necessary to clamber through problematic windows, and doing it slower on a 110% killer adds to the frustration. 2.1 marks the Hag's major add-on pass that was starting to occur. Behavior noticed that older killers didn't have add-ons that were up to par with current releases, and whilst the Hag didn't have any outliers, there were a few that were simply tidied up. 2.1 also sped up trap setting speeds again, but for all 3 phases, and the increased teleport range to 40 meters from 32 meters, reducing the need for the dried cicada. The next 2 patches, 2.2 and 2.3, were quality of life updates, not just for the Hag, but for all slower killers. 2.2 adjusted all 110% killers' lunges to be at the same speed as 115% killers, and 2.3 reduced the footstep audio, adding onto the already mentioned minor stealth aspects that the Hag has. The Hag would go on to be unchanged for roughly 4 years until 6.3, which would update her menu music, terror radius, and chase music to incorporate the earthly and swampy vibes with grungy percussion and eerie pan flutes. Have a listen. Most recently, 6.7 removed the interaction with flashlights that allowed survivors to burn traps away from a range. In order to remove them now, survivors must first crouch walk up to the trap and physically rub the mud away in order to disarm them. This was added alongside the removal of all other killer-specific interactions with flashlights, meaning my nurse video is already outdated. Thanks, behavior! Overall, the Hag has remained a powerful threat while still allowing for some modicum of counterplay. With this, she hasn't been the center of controversy unlike other killers who we will get to in the future of this series. And that is all you need to know about Lisa Sherwood, aka the Hag. Thank you for the support on the Michael Myers video, it truly means a lot. The anticipation for the next killer in this series is going to be quite electric, some may even call it maddening. I'll see you next time when we go to our appointment with the Doctor. See you then.